Greetings, guardsmen and yeomen. Today we're going to be getting into the infantry weapons of the church. Last time we talked about their artillery, planes, and tanks. Now we're going to be getting into the weapons that the warbands use themselves in the field. The First World War was a proving ground for some of the first modern weapons seen. Machine guns, automatic rifles, flamethrowers, gas canisters, and hand grenades, just to name a few. The war would vastly change from year to year, so the weapons that the common soldiers had to keep up and adapt. This is true within Trench Crusade as well, as the massive arms race between the faithful and heretic have continued on since 1099. When discussing the man-portable weapons of the First World War and of Trench Crusade, we're definitely going to have to start with probably the most feared and famous of these weapons, the machine gun. Able to fire hundreds of rounds a minute, it was able to cut down waves of men in the same way a farmer would use his scythe on fields of grain. Graded in both heavy and light variants, all sides developed their own machine guns. The first official machine gun would be created by American inventor Richard Gatling, for use by the American military. The Gatling gun would see sporadic use by Union forces during the American Civil War, though its role would greatly expand during the conflicts of Manifest Destiny and the Spanish-American War. The Gatling gun would be exported to numerous Western nations, and notably exported to Japan, where both sides would use the weapon within the Meiji Restoration. Ironically, Gatling had hoped that his weapon would bring peace, as he thought it would stop future wars from even happening by just how intimidating his weapon was. Naturally, the exact opposite happened, with everyone just wanting to use the gun to kill people better, making Gatling join both Nobel and Guillotine in the Hall of Violent Inventions meant to bring peace. The development of machine guns would greatly expand in the late 1800s, particularly after the creation of the Maxim gun in 1884 by Hermann Maxim. Many of the machine guns we see in the First World War are based off of his developments, most notably the MG08 from Germany and the British Vickers gun. The Maxim itself would see service well into the Second World War and far beyond. By 1914, most machine guns were capable of firing of upwards of 600 to 700 rounds a minute, and could be continuously fired as long as their barrels remained properly cooled. Hence the creation of the water-cooled jacket that we see on many World War I machine guns. Machine guns came in several variants, most notably heavy machine guns and light machine guns. Light machine guns were man-portable weapons, while heavy machine guns had to be emplaced. So let's get into some examples of heavy machine guns and just how they affected the war, starting with the German MG08. The MG08 was the standard machine gun of the Imperial German Army. First designed in 1901, it would be fully adopted as the standard machine gun in 1908, hence the name MG08. It could fire up to 600 rounds a minute, and was first used in Germany's colonial conflicts, though it would be pressed into full frontline service in 1914. It would be the MG08 that served as the reality check for many Allied soldiers, breaking the joyous summer that many thought of the war in the early stages of 1914. Most notably in Belgium, where it destroyed the Belgian cavalry charges, and at the Battle of the Frontier, where it was stated over 22,000 French troops would die in a single day, much to the gunfire of the MG08. It would become the standard machine gun of the Central Powers, seeing heavy use among 25 separate nations, particularly in Austria-Hungary and Turkey, becoming their main machine guns. There was one major drawback to the MG08, however. It was extremely heavy. Meant to be an emplacement weapon, it could barely be moved once set down in a location. It also required a crew of 8 men to successfully wield the machine gun. To combat this, Germany created some of the first dedicated machine gun corps seen in the First World War. They also began developing several variants of the MG08 as soon as 1915. Most notably the Maschinengewehr 0815, a quote-unquote lighter variant that only required 1 or 2 men to fully wield, and the 0818 Tuft, known to have fired armor-piercing ammunition. Variants of the Maxim gun also saw heavy use among the Entente powers, particularly the British that would field their own dedicated machine gun corps in 1914. They would use the British Vickers gun. The Vickers gun was developed in 1912 by the Vickers Engineering Corporation as a direct copy of the Maxim. Lighter than the MG08, it only required a crew of 3 to successfully man the weapon, and was stated to fire over 1 million rounds at the Battle of the Somme, with over 12 Vickers guns firing non-stop for 12 hours, though it could only fire 450 to 500 rounds a minute to the MG08's 600 rounds a minute. This lighter weight also made the Vickers gun much more versatile, as it was seen in use in both armored cars and in aircraft. Probably one of the more famous and widely used HMGs of the war was that of the French Hotchkiss. Created by the Hotchkiss Corporation, known for its field artillery and turn-of-the-century automobiles, the original version of the gun was a close clone of the Gatling gun developed by American Army officer Benjamin Hotchkiss. Keep in mind we're going to be seeing a lot of Americans, as America was just a little obsessed with creating machine guns at the period. Even lighter than the Vickers gun, it would be fed through stripper clips rather than a belt, and only require a crew of 2 to fully man. The Hotchkiss would find its way through pretty much every Allied army, and used on everything from armored cars to the FT-17's female variant, to almost every aircraft used by the French Aviation Corps. Even the British would use the Hotchkiss, particularly on their lighter tanks, with the Whippet tank carrying almost 4 Hotchkiss machine guns. Heavy machine guns are a common sight across New Antioch and the greater church forces as a whole, notably with the heavy mechanized infantry, where they can be seen wielding a 1910 Maxim as their main ranged weapon. There is even a specialized variant of this gun with the Red Brigade's mechanized infantry divisions using the 018 Twelfth, as seen by their air-cooled jacket rather than the traditional water-cooled one. It seems that the Vickers and Maxim are the main guns used by the New Antioch forces for their emplacements and vehicles, but you can see the occasional Hotchkiss or MG08 among their forces as well. The advancements and chemical alterations given to the mechanized infantry allow them to carry the heavy Maxim gun themselves, allowing it to be used as a man-portable weapon rather than simply an emplacement. The forces of the Faithful are also seen with a wide variety of light machine guns. The light machine gun was a squad-based weapon, with the vast majority being developed during the war to allow for compact fire support and firearm maneuver, as the heavier guns, like the MG08 and Vickers, required crews of several soldiers to operate effectively and would not be able to be moved quickly enough to support infantry advancements. Light machine guns were a common sight seen among many armies of the First World War, and greatly seen on the battlefields of the Crusade. Probably one of the most recognized light machine guns of the war has to be the Lewis gun, designed by yet another American ordnance officer, this time a Colonel Lewis. Colonel Lewis originally developed the gun for the U.S. Army. However, the Army didn't see a need for the weapon at the time and rejected the design. Discouraged, Colonel Lewis made his way to Belgium and started a gun factory there. He got in contact with the British military and was commissioned to finish the Lewis gun, and it would be fully adopted in 1914, just before the war started. The Lewis gun was one of the first man-portable machine guns of the war. Weighing just 28 pounds, a single man could use the weapon, allowing for a high mobility and the ability of keeping up with infantry assaults. Its design was well known, with its 97-round rotary magazine being highly distinct. It was used by pretty much all of the Western Allies, mostly the British Commonwealth forces, the Belgians, and the AEF once they arrived in France. The gun was coined as the Belgian rattlesnake by the Germans due to its high usage among Belgian forces and its high effectiveness in battle. Upon encountering the Belgian rattlesnake, the German army requested their own countermeasure to the Lewis gun, and commissioned Spandau to create a lighter version of the Machine Gewehr 08 with the Machine Gewehr 0815. This gun was meant to be more man-portable and had the German Stormtrooper Corps in mind to help provide close-quarters fire support during their lightning attacks. While in theory a single man could technically wield this gun, that gunner needed to hit the gym rather constantly, as the 0815 was about 40 pounds, not as light as the Lewis gun or the French Socha, and required mostly a gunner and an assistant to lug the machine gun around, though 2 men for a machine gun was a lot better than the 8 of the original version. The machine gun was meant as a wholesale replacement for the heavier Machine Gewehr 08, and was in many combat roles, particularly in vehicles, being placed on Germany's only tank of the war, and in aircraft, where it was one of the first guns fitted with a synchronization gear. It became probably the most common machine gun of the German military from 1915 onwards. For light machine guns in use with New Antioch forces and the greater church forces as a whole, it appears that the Lewis gun is the standard issue LMG. We see the Lewis in almost every warband related to the city, from your standard New Antioch warbands, the Red Brigade, Ere, and Alba, and seen in great numbers, being heavily produced within the factories and forges of New Antioch. But it's not the only light machine gun. Particularly the 0815 makes an appearance among the Stoßtruppen of Free Prussia and several trench pilgrim processions, mostly as war salvage. With the creation of Allokalkrum, these light machine guns are even lighter, being able to be lifted by a single man, which actually negates the problems of the 0815, allowing them to be used in the lightning assaults of the Stoßtruppen. The battlefields of the First World War were a proving ground for many new weapons. Weapons makers made everything and anything to try to gain an advantage on the front lines. Automatic rifles were one such invention. Developed by both sides and almost every nation developing their own variant, they were created mostly as a squad-level weapon in the arms race to make a lighter machine gun. Most of these automatic rifles would never leave the planning stages during the First World War, however, and all that did operated mostly as a light machine gun rather than a dedicated automatic rifle, usually as a crewed weapon by either a single man or a crew of two. Though it would be the lessons learned from the First World War that would advance the automatic rifle through the interwar period and into World War II, where we would see the first dedicated automatic rifles created. Definitely one of the more interesting variations of an automatic rifle is that of the Hellriegel. Created by Austria-Hungary, it would be designed originally as a light machine gun, though it can definitely be considered one of the first automatic rifles. Designed and tested in 1915, it never got out of the testing phases, and unfortunately, all mention of the weapon would cease after 1915. Created originally as a two-man light machine gun, it would use stick magazines for walking fire support and a drum magazine for emplacement fire, with the second crewman acting as an ammo bearer. Though with it never getting after the testing phases, there's no telling how the weapon would have actually fared in warlike conditions. One version of the automatic rifle that actually did see service was that of the Fedorov Avtomat. Designed by Russian Army officer Captain Fedorov in 1913, originally as a semi-automatic rifle before being fully automatic in 1915, it became one of the first automatic rifles to actually be fielded in war, again as a light machine gun, with a two-man crew, and interestingly enough, using the Japanese Arasaka round as its main source of ammunition, and being fed with stripper clips. As the gun was so expensive to produce, it only came with one magazine, and would see sporadic service during World War I, being rushed into service for the Kerensky offensive. It would see continued service by the Red Army after 1917 during the Russian Civil War, though it would be pulled from service in the 1920s due to Soviet standardization efforts, only for the Avtomat to be put back into service due to the lack of automatic weapons within the Soviet military during the Winter War. Of course, a list of light machine guns / automatic rifles can't be complete without talking about the French Socha, the oh-so-popular Socha. The Socha was developed as France's main light machine gun in 1915, and can be considered a candidate for one of the first automatic rifles as well, often being referred to as a machine rifle, and is probably most infamous as one of the worst, if not the worst, light machine guns of the war, though this moniker is more dependent on the type of Socha that you're talking about. And for the most part, it was an okay weapon design and performed relatively well, but was designed for the wrong type of war. Developed by the Gladiator Cycle Company, yes, you heard that right, a literal bicycle company made this gun, it was made to be a lighter version of the Hotchkiss machine gun and France's answer to the Lewis gun. It would be one of the first of its kind fielded in 1915, and was used by multiple nations by the end of the war, particularly the AEF of America and the Russian Imperial Air Corps. Despite its advancements, the gun was ill-suited for the trenches. The magazine had a hole cut into the side to allow the gunner to see how many rounds were left, though if you know anything about World War I, you can see the serious issue here, as mud could gum up the bike spring being used to push the rounds through the feed. Yes, they used an actual bike spring for their magazine feed. There was also the problem of having to watch out for the weapon's charging handle, as the weapon could, when fired, swing that charging handle back and punch the gunner in the face, giving what the gunners would call the Socha kiss. Despite some other glaring issues, the gun did perform rather well with the lighter French ammunition, and most French gunners considered the Socha a pretty good weapon. Much of the issues arose with the export variations of the Sosha, particularly the one given to the American Expeditionary Forces. The AEF requested thousands of Soshas to supplement their armed forces in 1917. With one major caveat: it had to fire the heavier 30-06 round used as the standard round of ammunition by the American forces at the time. Unfortunately, the French arms manufacturers could not comprehend what a 30-06 round was, or the Imperial system for that matter, resulting in the gun still being made with the lighter French round in mind, meaning the gun would break apart when fired for any length of time with this heavier ammunition, and the width of the barrel being way too small for the American ammunition, resulting in jams in the best of cases, and at worst case, complete detonation of the weapon in the hands of the gunner. Naturally, not ideal, as the American gunner would usually only be able to fire a few cycles of the rifle before it would completely jam and they would have to disregard it for either their backup weapon or a rifle. Which is not what you want out of a squad automatic weapon meant to be heavy fire support for a rifle platoon. The state of the export version of the Sosha greatly pissed off the AEF, and one famous American in particular. Inventor John Moses Browning, the creator of most of the arsenal of the American military and the cannon saint of the machine gun, who upon hearing these issues with the Sosha and the news that his son Val Browning would be forced to wield one of these weapons as part of the machine gun corps, he sought out to make his own improvement for the US forces. And you know what? He succeeded, creating the M1918. No, not that one. There we go. Probably one of the most famous automatic rifles, the Browning Automatic Rifle, or BAR. Based upon the 30-06 round, the BAR was able to fire at the same rate as many of the light machine guns at the time, and considered probably one of the most advanced rifles to come out of World War I. While available for full mass-scale production in 1918, very few instances of the BAR would be sent to the front lines, mostly out of a fear from American high command of the Germans capturing this weapon and reverse engineering it, as the BAR had many advanced features. But a few soldiers, most notably Browning's own son Val, were able to use the weapon for field testing, where it performed extremely well, especially in clearing out trenches, where it was able to switch from semi-automatic to fully automatic very easily, with every soldier issued with the BAR falling in love with the weapon. Slated for mass-scale production in 1919, the armistice would put a halt to this, though the BAR would remain as a mainstay in the US forces entering the interwar period, where it would be spread out to National Guard armories and even some police departments. There was even some examples of a BAR falling into the hand of gangsters. Most notably, Bonnie and Clyde were seen wielding a BAR in their robberies. It wouldn't be until World War II that the BAR saw a massive upscale in production, though not as a rifle, as it would be rushed into a role it was not meant for, as a squad light machine gun, meant to make up for the lack of a portable machine gun in the American arsenal. It performed alright in this role, though suffered from continuous firing issues and its low capacity magazine. The rifle would still see use into Korea, though it would be replaced by the M60 going forward. Within Trench Crusade, the automatic rifle was seen as a creation of the demonic Lord Marbus, but due to battlefield capture and reverse engineering by the Prussian Institute of War and the Institute of Metallurgy, the Church was able to make their own equivalents. Notably, the most numerous automatic rifle within Church forces is that of the BAR. The Browning automatic rifle is commonly seen within New Antioch forces, and can be considered the standard issue automatic rifle of New Antioch. Almost every warband is equipped with a BAR, and most notably in either their Combat Engineering Corps or in their Shock Troopers, where they're extensively seen. This includes the Red Brigade, as they are also deployed with BARs, with at least one being in their warbands. Though the BAR is not the only variant of the auto rifle seen among the forces of the faithful, most notably the Fedorov Automat and the Sosha have been seen within the warbands of Trebuzond, who more than likely acquired them from the Russian Imperial forces and the French respectively, meaning that both the Sosha and Automov are heavily used in different warbands. The forces of Free Prussia are heavily seen with the Hellriegel. The Hellriegel is a smaller, more compact design, and even can be considered a submachine gun. It adds to the Stahlstruppen way of warfare of lightning attacks, and is the preferred automatic weapon, though the BAR is seen among their warbands as well. The use of metals like orichalcum make the auto rifles lighter and even more efficient. and it won't be long before the auto rifle replaces the standard bolt action in the great arms race against the heretics. One creation that was seen at the later stages of the First World War was that of the submachine gun, or SMG. Developed to face the confined natures of the trenches and to give tank crews more firepower than their standard issue pistol, this compact gun would not see much service during the First World War, with most not coming till the final months of 1918, just before the armistice. Probably the most famous of the submachine guns of the First World War is that of the MP-18, or the Machine Pistol 1918, designed by Germany in 1918 to supplement the stormtroopers for the spring offensive. Though the machine gun would not reach the front lines in enough numbers to cause any major impact during those offensives. The MP-18 was still a massive morale hit to enemy forces, and provided a lot of firepower to stormtroopers, most notably during the Kaiserslautern offensives, the last major offensive of Germany during the war. Able to place a lot of firepower downrange, they were prone to jamming, as it used a drum magazine that poorly fit the weapon. Around 30,000 of them would be produced by the end of the armistice, with most being transferred to police units and paramilitary groups like the Freikorps in the interwarring periods. Some MP-18s would even be stolen by fascist groups to conduct false flag sabotage operations after being stolen from the government. It would be the Machine Pistol 1918 that would be the basis for a lot of the submachine guns we see within Germany in World War II. One submachine gun that has an interesting connection to the Great War is that of the Thompson. Created off a patent in 1915 by John Billish for a blowback submachine gun, here comes probably our fourth Army Ordnance Officer, a Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. Thompson would develop his submachine gun in 1917 through 1918, designed for the U.S. Army Marines to break the stalemates of the trenches, using the famous .45 ACP round common with the M1911 sidearm. Though the armistice would arrive before the gun was ready for the front lines, with the first prototypes being developed in 1919. And the Thompson would be fully adopted by the Marine Raiders in 1921. The Thompson would also pass on to police forces across the United States, and eventually, through being stolen, criminal gangs, particularly the mafias, where it earned a reputation in gangster movies and reels, and earned names like the Chicago Typewriter and Tommy Gun from this gangster era. The Thompson would be one of the first mass-produced submachine guns, and by World War II would be the mainline submachine gun for several nations, mostly the United States and the United Kingdom, developed in both a 30-round stick magazine and a 50-round drum magazine. There was one submachine gun that actually beat the MP-18 to the battlefield, becoming the first fielded SMG of the war by just a few weeks, the Italian Beretta M1918. Created out of a failed airplane machine gun turret, it would be combined with an Italian Carcano rifle and other spare parts to form the SMG. The M1918 saw service with the RDT units and created 3 separate variants, including a fully automatic version that could fire up to 900 rounds a minute. The M1918 proved so highly effective and loved by its wielders that the rest of its machine gun that it originally came from were broken down to make more 1918s. It would see service with the Italian forces well into the interwar period, and a modified version would even see service during the Italian offensives of World War II. 2 other submachine guns seen with the arsenal of the church is that of the Sten gun and the M3 grease gun. These are seen within the church arsenal, but have no connection to World War I but World War II. They were created as cheaper alternatives to the Thompson submachine gun. Capable of the same rate of fire, they would be made out of cheaper stamped parts rather than the more expensive machined parts of the Thompson. While still very effective, their cheap design did cause many issues. They would be easily jammed with a little bit of dirt in their feeds, and in the case of the grease gun, a light tap could make the gun unusable by breaking several internal parts. The Sten would find heavy use among commando units, and the M3 mostly among vehicle crews. Both would be used until the late 90s, mostly by backline units. Submachine guns have prominent roles within the church forces. Particularly the Thompson submachine gun is seen with both shock troopers and engineers as the main submachine gun of New Antioch. The weapon was created from the Prussian Institutes of War and produced en masse from factories within the city of New Antioch itself. The same with most US-style weapons within the Crusade. While the Sten and grease guns are not as common with the more official church forces, They are passed out en masse to pilgrim processions and more backmarker units and militias. The Stoßtruppen make extensive use of submachine guns, and particularly seen with both Thompsons, MP-18s, and Hellriegels. The submachine gun proving highly effective in the styles of raiding warfare currently taking place within the Crusade, being able to clear out trenches efficiently and quickly. A number of special weapons were developed to gain an advantage in the trenches, from anti-material rifles, grenade launchers, and even flamethrowers. Flamethrowers were created by the German army in early 1915 as a way of clearing out enemy fortifications. Their operators would usually be attached to storm battalions and assist stormtroopers with their lightning assaults. Their main tactic was to douse a trench line in fire to force the enemy out of their trenches, that or get burned alive. There they'd be gunned down by riflemen. The vast majority of casualties caused by the flamethrowers was with the assisting riflemen running from the flame operator. Most flamethrower operators were recruited from local fire departments due to them being very comfortable around fire. The man-portable variant was known as the Flammenwerfer, or the Kleif, and it was a man-portable system with a crew around 4 men. 2 men to operate the flamethrower, an officer and a grenadier for protection. And a pair of more static systems known as the Großflammenwerfer, or the Grof, until 1917, where a single man-portable variation of the Flammenwerfer was created, known as the Wechselapparat, or the Wex, replacing both systems till the end of the war. Operators were major targets upon the battlefield, and teams would need to be protected with almost an entire platoon of assisting stormtroopers, as they would be the first targeted by enemy fire due to this how much everyone feared a flamethrower operator. There was also the problem with the weapon being so new that it could easily fail and lose pressure, making the weapon almost completely useless. Within Trench Crusade, flamethrowers have been seen in many warbands. While the weapon system would be ineffective against demons, especially those of the Seven-Headed Serpent, to the followers of the Black Grail and the mortal followers of Hell, they still prove highly effective. Flamethrowers are almost required among fighting the Black Grail or the Great Hunger, as they would be needing to purge an entire area in flame just to make sure they can secure the area and contain the spread. Most variants seen among the regiments appear to be the German Grof in emplacements, to burn enemy charges to ash should they attack, and in the warbands, the later variants of the Kleif, requiring only a single man to wield, they're a common sight. Though among the Red Brigade, it appears that the Wechsenapparatus, or Wex, is seen heavily used as well, meaning they're probably the newest creation within New Antioch, as the Red Brigade gets top picks of the newest weapon systems. Outside of the brigade, the Stoßtruppen also make use of the Wex, with their pioneers using gouts of flame to pin down heretical positions during their breakthroughs. In 1916, at the Battle of the Somme, the first tanks rolled onto the battlefield. Germany had very few ways to combat this new weapon. Artillery, while very effective, had trouble hitting the moving vehicles, and the standard rifle and machine gun rounds didn't pierce the side armor of the tank. Some of the first ways to combat this were reverse bullets and K rounds. While effective at piercing the hides of the tank, they were extremely dangerous to fire, as the extra powder could simply blow up in the rifle. After extensive research of captured Allied tanks, it was found that the armor could be pierced in certain places with heavy rounds. And this would be the creation of the Mauser M1918 Tank Gewehr, or simply the tank rifle. Using an extremely heavy 13mm round, it could pierce the armor of even the Mark IV British tanks. It would be designed off of the Mauser rifle, and would be the only anti-tank rifle ever to be produced during World War I. Extremely heavy, around 40 pounds, it required a bipod to fire effectively, due to its weight and intensive recoil. This would not be a weapon I would want to fire. In fact, I could feel the pain in my shoulder just by looking at the thing. The rifle required a crew of 2, a gunner and assistant. The bipod itself had to be buried into the ground, and the shooter either prone or firing from inside a trench. The creators of the rifle looked to big game rifles in Africa, particularly the elephant gun, for inspiration, but took no thought to recoil mitigation, as the manual itself even states to replace the gunner after 3 shots in an attempt to save their shoulders. There's also a massive emphasis on proper shooting technique with the weapon, as one misfire or misplacement of your arm could easily break your shoulder due to the intensive recoil. While most gunners tried to smartly add more padding to that side of their body, it still did not help, and a gunner needed to be replaced mostly after firing once or twice. The forces of the church also run into problems with heavily armored foes. From the myriad of armored vehicles that hell brings to the forefront, to the concrete casemates and fortifications in their trenches, to heavily armed demons where normal rifle rounds simply bounce off. These problems led to the Institute of War within Königsberg to develop the anti-material rifle, a rifle that has been known to pierce the hides of any demons, destroy any concrete fortification, and disable many a heretic vehicle. This rifle has proven very effective and a boon to many warbands, though it comes with many caveats and issues. The rifle is extremely heavy, requiring several men to wield the weapon, or heavy chemical enhancement. It also incurs an intensive recoil when fired, even with its orichalcum make, and actual recoil mitigation that we can see on the weapon. Much better than the real world's Tankaver. The weapon can either be deployed in two-man teams, used by the heavy mechanized infantry squads due to their chemical alterations, or for the most part allocated to anti-tank communicants. The rifle requires a specialized ammunition, nails. Yes, literal nails that have been nailed to the bodies of crucified martyrs. Surprisingly, or if you know anything about Crusade, far less surprisingly, they're easy to come by, as crucified martyrs exist in their thousands around the city of New Antioch, with literal piles of nails being prepped for anti-material rifles. The rounds are then enhanced by the Mentalist Order monks with the blood of the Meadow Christ, making them extremely potent. Despite the rifle's issues, it's proven highly effective upon the fields of the Crusades, and is highly sought after by New Antioch warbands. Now, what happens when trench pilgrims require anti-armor support? They don't have access to anti-material rifles, or any other heavy weapon for that matter. Unless they're extremely lucky and they're able to afford a communicant anti-tank team, or tactically acquire it, cavalcade, or by the grace of God, just happen to find one sitting in a farmhouse somewhere. They're pretty SOL, because let's face it, most pilgrims are dirt poor, and there's a snowball chance in hell of finding an anti-material rifle in a field somewhere. So what is a pilgrim to do? Well, they have access to their family gun stores, should they've been on the more wealthier side before taking the pilgrimage. They might be able to loot something on the way to the Levant, or make use of the many shady arms dealers on the pilgrimage routes to acquire the everyman's anti-material rifle, the punt gun. Yes, the punt gun actually existed in reality. Mostly as a novelty weapon used in duck hunts, this massive shotgun, yes, it was actually a shotgun, not a rifle, was able to take out entire flocks of geese in one shot, with some estimates stating over 500 geese a day could be killed by an operator of the punt gun. The gun could be loaded with up to 25 ounces of powder, and was normally fired from either a static position or from a boat due to the intensive recoil of the weapon. Though surprisingly, it had better recoil protection than the Tankaver. The gun never really counted on other than a novelty weapon, as many found it unsporting to shoot down an entire flock of geese in one go, and it also caused concerns over overhunting. Trench pilgrims make heavy use of the punt gun as a makeshift heavy weapon and anti-armor rifle, and one with a surprising amount of accuracy and a wide area of effect, making it popular among all processions despite the danger to the wielder. And honestly, the trench pilgrims don't care whatsoever about the dangers, and they'll use the weapon continuously until their own bodies would give out. Finally, let's get into some of the standard issued weapons for the warbands. These would be the rifles, shotguns, and pistols. The bolt-action rifle was probably the most common sight among the forces of New Antioch and the greater church as a whole, with several types being seen among the yeomen. Bolt-actions were the standard rifle of all combatants during the First World War, and all sides, especially the Entente powers, produced their own domestic variants. Some of the most famous ones are the Lee Enfield SMLE, particularly the Mark III variation created in 1907. After conflicts in South Africa, it quickly became the standard issue rifle of all Commonwealth forces, and still can be seen today among militia forces of some nations. You also had the Russian Mosin Nagant, the French Lebel 1896, and the Japanese Arisaka rifles being common. Most of the Central Power rifles use some variation of the German Mauser, most notably the Gewehr 1885, which was heavily exported to other nations, the 1888 Commission rifle, or the more German-exclusive Gewehr 1898, which proved to be one of the most effective rifles of the war. Within Trench Crusade, it appears that the Church favors the Lee Enfield as their standard-issue bolt-action rifle, as the Lee Enfield SMLE is seen with both the standard new Antioch warbands and with the Red Brigade. Though this does not stop local variants from being shown, as French warbands still make heavy use of the Lebel 1896, and the Nagant is seen within the forces of both Imperial Russia and the forces of Trebizond. Among the Free Prussians, the Staatstruppen favor either the Lee, or more commonly, the 1898 Mauser as their rifle of choice. When it comes to the rifles of the Trench Pilgrims, they don't have the best choices. Most either gather their old hunting rifles from their family armories, battlefield salvage, or overstocked rifles from New Antioch if they're lucky. Almost everything and anything can be used as a rifle for the trench processions, from early generation Lees and Mausers, to needle guns and trapdoor rifles from the turn of the century, to even muzzleloaders have been seen among the pilgrims. As far as shotguns, they would become extremely effective during trench warfare. Known as trench sweepers, the most common one among church forces is that of the 1897 trench gun, developed for use in conflicts in the Philippines originally. They became a common sight among the American Expeditionary Forces once they arrived in France in 1917. They proved so effective at clearing out the German trenches that the Germans attempted to declare the weapon a war crime, and stated they would execute anybody seen with buckshot rounds or armed with a shotgun. Several variations of the shotgun have been developed for the warbands of the faithful, most notably created by the Prussian Engineering Corps of Königsberg, the automatic shotgun. The automatic shotgun was heavily based off the Remington 1897 as well, though equipped with an autoloader and a drum magazine. The automatic shotgun is ideal for close quarters combat, thanks to its high rate of power and accuracy. The technology, however, has not been perfected, and sometimes it can lead to a misfeed or a jamming of the weapon. Despite this, the automatic shotgun finds heavy use among the warbands of the Red Brigade and the Staatstruppen of Free Prussia. This is not the only variation of the shotgun that we can see, as there are reports from the forces of Trebizond being able to create special rounds of ammunition made from the ash of artillery witches and sacramental wine to produce a dragon fire round, capable of setting heretics alight with Greek fire. Last but not least, let's talk about the smallest firearm available for the forces of the Church, the pistols. Pistols were a common sight among the combatants of the First World War, as the Great War would be one of the first conflicts to actually have a standard sidearm for their soldiers. And there'd be a wide range of variants created, from semi-automatics, fully automatics, to even revolvers, and everyone from machine gun operators, artillery crews, pilots, vehicle operators, naval crews, to even telegraph layers and trench raiders were issued with a sidearm. Most famously, they were issued to their officer class, and served as a sign of rank over your standard infantry. So let us go through a couple examples of pistols that we can see in use among the church forces. Probably the most famous pistol to come out of the First World War was that of the C-96 Mauser. Often referred to as the broom handle, this was one of the first mass-produced officer sidearms of the war. The Mauser would be exported to many nations and would even be popular among Allied officers in the years prior to the war, including Winston Churchill, who had his own Mauser during the Boer War. But most of these Allied officers would drop having German weapons when the war started, as it was seen as improper, though the C-96 would actually find heavy use with the Russian Imperial forces, and especially during the Russian Civil War, as it became the stereotypical pistol of the NKVD. These pistols are known for their extreme reliability, though could be hard to maintain, as many of the examples required a watch manufacturer to repair correctly due to the small internal parts of the weapon. Despite the commonality of the C-96, it was not the standard issue sidearm of the German military. That was another common pistol, the Luger. The Luger, also known as the P08, was a semi-automatic handgun designed by George Luger, and would end up being used by multiple nations as well, and even had several trials to become the standard sidearm of the United States, being switched over for .45 ACP rather than the standard 9mm. thousands of Lugers would be produced for the First World War, and would see service well into World War II and beyond, with several variations of the Luger also being produced. Most notably, the artillery Luger. The artillery Luger was a fully automatic variation of the pistol that came with a drum magazine. Mainly used to provide artillery crews extra firepower, while provided a high rate of fire, they were highly unreliable and hard to control, as the weapon was prone to jam and misfeed. One other pistol seen heavily among the church forces is that of the Webley service revolver. The Webley was the standard pistol of both British and Commonwealth forces during the Great War, getting its start from the Boer War in South Africa, and for the most part replaced the Mauser as the more British design. It would mostly be the Mark VI variant created in 1915 and fired a 4.55 round. The Webley would be issued to soldiers with specialized combat roles, such as naval boarders, trench raiders, artillery crews, and runners, along with backline soldiers and, of course, the officer corps and NCOs. This is where you've most likely seen the Webley in World War I media, and it was stated to perform extremely well in the trenches. The most common pistol that we can see among the forces of New Antioch and the wider church appears to be the C96, where it's mostly used with the New Antioch shock forces and in the officer corps, with everyone from the Free Prussians to the Red Brigade making heavy use of the pistol. There is even an automatic variation of the C96 produced, replacing the standard box magazine of the C96 for a modified drum mag. But this is not the only pistol seen, as the Webley is also made in mass numbers, mostly with the forces of Trebuzond and the warbands of Ere and Alba. The Luger appears to be more of a weapon of hell, though several instances, particularly the artillery variant, have popped up among the trench pilgrim processions, usually with the stematic nuns. If this is a product of New Antioch or just some battlefield salvage is unknown. And with that, we've reached the end of our discussion of the weapons of the church, particularly firearms. Now, there are plenty more firearms, most notably the M911 and many others. I mostly try to stick to the ones that we can see upon church models or within the art, though there is plenty of leeway if you want to add your favorite weapon from the Great War. Thank you all for watching if you stuck this far, and sorry about the longer delay. This was a longer video, and the month of May was very busy outside of YouTube. So, again, thank you all for sticking with me and being patient. If you stuck this far and haven't subscribed yet, why not give it a shot? Clearly you like this type of stuff, and I'm going to be continuing on. We're going to be talking more about the naval warfare, cleaning up some stuff with the Prussians, and actually even getting into Trebuzond. We've mentioned a little bit here, and there's actually more to them. They're a new fan creation that's gotten the nod from Thomas and the creators of Trench Crusade. And outside of Trench Crusade, we'll be slowly kind of getting into 40k again, AOS, fantasy, wherever we see the grunts of our sci-fi and fantasy war games. So, again, hope you all enjoyed. Thank you all for watching. And I hope you have a great day, or night, or whenever you're watching this. Now I gotta get back to the archives. Have a good one.